You're too soft for this. Just sit there and don't embarrass yourself. That was my brother's voice, loud enough for everyone at the table to hear. My aunt actually laughed. Someone else shook their head like I was a child who'd wandered into the wrong room. We were sitting in my uncle's living room, papers spread out on the table, talking about a family business decision that apparently concerned everyone except me. I tried to speak. I really did. I opened my mouth, and before I could finish a sentence, my cousin cut me off with a sigh. This is adult stuff. You wouldn't understand. My face burned. I could feel my hands shaking under the table, but no one noticed, or they did and didn't care. They talked over me, around me, past me, as if I wasn't even there. Like I was furniture. That was the moment it hit me. In their eyes, I wasn't just unimportant, I was weak. Someone to dismiss. Someone safe to underestimate. I swallowed hard and forced a small smile, because pushing back right then would have only proven their point. Inside, though, something snapped quietly into place. They thought I had no power. They thought I had no spine. They thought I'd just accept the role they'd assigned me. And sitting there, invisible at that table, I realized something they didn't yet understand. I wasn't losing. I was learning. To understand why that moment hurt so much, you need to know who these people were to me, and why they felt so comfortable judging my life. They weren't strangers. They were my own family and a few close relatives who'd been part of every holiday, every birthday, every important discussion about my future. From the outside, we probably looked normal. Supportive, even. But inside, the roles had been assigned a long time ago, and mine was painfully clear. I was the weak one. The too sensitive one. The one everyone felt entitled to correct, advise, or quietly dismiss. My older sister, Megan, was the golden example. Stable job, confident voice, always knew what to say in a room full of people. My Uncle Mark liked to joke that she was the responsible one, usually while glancing at me like I was some unfinished project. My Aunt Linda treated my choices like temporary phases I'd eventually grow out of, if I grew up at all. And then there was me. I didn't fail loudly. I didn't cause scandals. I just didn't fit their idea of success. I changed paths. I hesitated. I took risks quietly. And because they didn't see immediate results, they decided I wasn't going anywhere. Over time, that judgment turned into permission for them to speak over me, decide for me, and assume I'd always stay exactly where they placed me. What they never realized was that I was watching. Listening. Learning. And slowly preparing to stop playing the role they wrote for me. For as long as I can remember, I was the soft one. That's what they called me, sometimes jokingly, sometimes with a sigh, sometimes with outright irritation. At family dinners, my opinions were brushed aside before I even finished a sentence. If I hesitated before answering a question, someone would laugh and say, "See? She can't handle pressure." If I showed emotion, it became proof that I was fragile. If I stayed calm, they said I had nothing important to say. My sister once told me, right in front of our cousins, "You're just not built for real responsibility." Everyone chuckled. No one corrected her. That was the role they assigned me, the one who needed help, supervision, decisions made for her. They spoke over me, decided things without me, and then acted surprised when I pulled back. What hurt most wasn't the insults themselves, but how confidently they said them. As if it were an established fact. As if my entire identity had already been agreed upon behind closed doors. I started to notice how often sentences about me began with "she wouldn't understand," or "let's not involve her." Over time, I stopped defending myself. Not because I agreed, but because arguing only seemed to confirm their narrative. Every attempt to stand up for myself was framed as overreaction. Every silence was taken as proof. They didn't see a person. They saw a label. And the worst part? Slowly, quietly. I started to wonder if they were right. That night, after everyone finally left and the house went quiet, something shifted in me. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't cry in front of them. I just started watching. For the first time in my life, I stopped trying to explain myself and started paying attention to how they treated me. I noticed how my sister would speak for me before I even opened my mouth. How my uncle would laugh at my ideas, not with me. How decisions were made in rooms I wasn't invited into, then presented to me as already settled. I saw how often phrases like "you wouldn't understand" or "let us handle this" were used to quietly push me aside. It was subtle, but once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. They weren't just underestimating me, they were benefiting from it. My silence made things easier for them. My compliance kept the balance exactly where they wanted it. So I stayed quiet on purpose. I asked fewer questions. I nodded more. I let them think their narrative still worked. Inside, though, I was connecting dots. Patterns of control. Who held power? Who panicked when things didn't go their way? They thought my silence meant weakness. In reality, it was the moment I finally started learning the rules of their game. It wasn't a screaming match or some dramatic walkout that changed everything. It was quieter than that. Almost invisible to everyone else. We were sitting at the kitchen table, and they were talking about me like I wasn't even there, deciding what I should do next, what I was capable of, what I would probably mess up. Someone laughed and said, "She means well, but she's just not built for real responsibility." And something inside me finally went still. I didn't feel anger the way I used to. No heat. No shaking. Just this sharp, cold clarity settling into my chest. I realized I had been fighting the wrong battle all along. I kept trying to prove I wasn't weak, hoping one day they'd wake up and see me differently. But the truth hit me hard in that moment, they needed me to stay weak. Their power, their confidence, their little hierarchy depended on me staying exactly where they'd put me. So I stopped reacting. I stopped explaining. I nodded when they spoke. I smiled when they dismissed me. Inside, I was already stepping away. Not physically, not yet, but emotionally, strategically. That was the moment I chose myself, quietly. No announcements. No ultimatums. Just a decision I didn't owe anyone an explanation for. They thought I was retreating. What they didn't realize was that this was the first move I'd ever made entirely on my own terms. After that moment of clarity, something in me changed, quietly, almost invisibly. I didn't announce it. I didn't confront anyone. I just stepped back. I stopped correcting them when they misunderstood me. I stopped explaining my decisions. When they made jokes about how I'd never survive on my own or how I was too soft, I smiled politely and let it hang in the air. It felt wrong at first, like I was betraying myself by staying silent. For years, my instinct had been to defend, to prove, to beg to be taken seriously, but I realized something uncomfortable: my explanations were feeding their sense of power. So I withdrew. I answered messages later. I skipped gatherings. I shared less. When they asked what I was doing with my life, I gave vague, boring answers. Just working. Nothing special. I watched how easily they filled in the blanks with their own assumptions, that I was still struggling, still behind, still weak. And I let them. From a distance, I started seeing things more clearly. Who spoke over whom? Who made decisions and who benefited? Who needed someone beneath them to feel secure? The more I stepped back, the more relaxed they became. They thought I was fading into the background, finally accepting my place. What they didn't realize was that stepping back wasn't surrender. It was space. Space to think. Space to plan. Space to become someone they would never see coming. Once I stopped trying to prove myself, I started paying attention. Really paying attention. I listened more than I spoke. I watched how decisions were made, who actually held power, and who just liked to pretend they did. I noticed patterns I'd missed before: how money moved quietly behind the scenes, how favors were traded, how certain names always came up when something needed approval. I started educating myself in silence. Late nights reading about finances, contracts, and basic legal principles. I learned how leverage actually works, not through shouting or drama, but through timing, information, and patience. I paid attention to who depended on whom, who was stretched thin, and who was hiding cracks behind confidence. People thought I was fading into the background. That I'd finally accepted my role as the weak one. They spoke freely around me now. Shared things they never would have before. Complained. Bragged. Slipped up. And I didn't interrupt them. I didn't correct them. I just collected pieces of the puzzle. For the first time in my life, I wasn't reacting emotionally. I was learning the rules of their game, the real rules, not the ones they pretended existed. And the more I learned, the clearer it became, they had underestimated the wrong person. I wasn't planning revenge. I wasn't even planning confrontation. I was planning independence. Control. A future where their opinions no longer mattered. They thought silence meant weakness. They had no idea it meant preparation. Once I understood the rules, I didn't flip the table. I nudged it, just enough that only I noticed. I stopped reacting emotionally and started making tiny, deliberate choices that looked harmless on the surface. I changed how I communicated. Shorter messages. Fewer explanations. I began documenting everything, dates, comments, promises people forgot they made. Not because I planned to confront anyone yet, but because I wanted clarity for myself. I updated my resume quietly and reconnected with an old colleague over coffee, framing it like a casual catch-up. I separated my finances, opened an account in my own name, and stopped relying on shared family help that always came with strings attached. When someone offered advice, I nodded, thanked them, and did the opposite. Letting them believe I was still unsure gave me room to move. I also started setting micro-boundaries that sounded reasonable. I can't do that this week. I need that in writing. Let me think about it. No drama. No speeches. Just pauses. The funny thing? The more I pulled back, the more confident I felt. They mistook my calm for compliance. They thought I was still the same, hesitant, soft, easy to steer. But those small moves stacked up. A paper trail. Independent income. Allies who respected me. Time bought quietly. By the time anyone noticed the shift, the ground under them had already changed. And for the first time, I wasn't bracing for impact. I was choosing when, and how, to move next. Something shifted inside me during that quiet period, not all at once, but steadily. The more I stopped reacting, the more power I felt returning to me. I didn't announce changes. I didn't explain myself. I just stopped shrinking. They mistook my calm for weakness. When they made jokes at my expense, I smiled politely. When they talked over me, I let them. When they dismissed my ideas, I nodded and took mental notes. Inside, though, I was no longer doubting myself. I was observing with clarity instead of hurt. I started trusting my instincts again. I realized how often my silence made people uncomfortable, how they filled it with assumptions that worked in my favor. They thought I had given up. That I'd accepted my place. That I was finally being reasonable. But the truth was, I had never felt more grounded. I knew things they didn't. I had information, options, and patience. I slept better. I stopped replaying arguments in my head. I stopped needing their approval to feel solid. There's a strange kind of confidence that comes from not needing to prove anything. From knowing that the story people tell about you isn't the truth, just a convenience for them. I carried myself differently then. Quieter. Steadier. They still underestimated me. And I let them, because for the first time I understood something deeply: confidence doesn't need an audience. And silence, when chosen, can be louder than any argument. The first time I noticed it, it wasn't dramatic. No shouting. No confrontation. Just a pause. A long, uncomfortable pause. We were sitting at the table, the same people who had spent years talking over me, correcting me, deciding things for me. My uncle was explaining, as usual, how something would be handled, already assuming I'd nod along. I didn't. I asked a simple question instead. Calm. Precise. About numbers he clearly hadn't checked. He froze. Then my cousin laughed it off and said, "When did you start caring about this stuff?" I smiled and didn't answer. After that, things started slipping. They'd make plans and realize, too late, that I already knew about them. Someone tried to pressure me into agreeing to a timeline, and I casually mentioned a clause they didn't realize existed. The room went quiet again. I could feel it then. Confusion. Unease. The version of me they were comfortable dismissing wasn't responding anymore. They started watching their words around me. Asking instead of telling. Double-checking things they never had before. My silence had weight now, and they didn't know why. That was the first shock, not that I challenged them, but that I didn't need to raise my voice to do it. They didn't notice it right away, and that was the point. For months, I had been quietly repositioning myself while everyone was busy underestimating me. I stopped asking for permission. I stopped explaining my decisions. I stopped reacting. And then, at the exact moment they expected me to stay small, I made my move. It wasn't dramatic. No shouting. No confrontation. Just one calm action that changed everything. I transferred the account they relied on into my sole control, legally, cleanly, with documents they had signed months earlier without reading. I renegotiated an agreement they assumed I didn't understand. I accepted an offer they thought I was too scared to pursue. And I did it all without announcing it. The first sign something was wrong came when the questions started. Hey, did something change? Why can't I access this anymore? Who approved that decision? I remember sitting at my kitchen table, phone face down, heart steady. For the first time in my life, I wasn't reacting, I was watching. They scrambled. They double-checked emails. They blamed each other. And slowly, painfully, the realization crept in, the rules had changed, and they weren't the ones making them anymore. When they finally confronted me, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't justify myself. I just looked at them and said, calmly, I made the decision that was best for me. The silence that followed was louder than any argument we'd ever had. That was the moment I knew, the game had shifted. And this time I was the one holding the board. The shift didn't happen all at once, it cracked through them in small, ugly moments. Conversations stopped when I walked into rooms. Text messages went unanswered, then suddenly doubled. People who used to talk at me started asking careful questions, like they were trying to read a language they never bothered to learn before. I saw it first in Mark's face when he realized a deal he'd been counting on had quietly fallen apart. He laughed it off, said it was just bad timing, but his eyes kept darting to me. Then my sister snapped at me over nothing, her voice sharp, defensive, like a cornered animal. She accused me of being weird lately, of acting different, as if calm was suspicious coming from me. The funniest part? They had no idea what I'd actually done. They just felt the ground shifting under their feet. The power they'd assumed was permanent suddenly felt unstable, and they didn't know why. That uncertainty ate at them. They argued with each other, contradicted their own stories, rewrote plans on the fly. Meanwhile, I stayed quiet. I listened. I took notes. Panic makes people sloppy, and confusion makes them reveal everything they were hiding. For the first time in my life, they weren't watching me to judge, they were watching me because they were afraid I knew something they didn't. The moment it really shifted wasn't loud. No slammed doors. No dramatic speeches. It was quiet, and that's how I knew it was real. We were all sitting in the same room we'd been in 100 times before. Same people. Same seating. Same assumptions. Except this time, the questions were directed at me. Not because I demanded attention, but because suddenly, they needed answers. I noticed it in the pauses. The way conversations stopped when I spoke. The way people glanced at each other before responding to me, carefully choosing their words. The same people who used to talk over me were now watching my reactions, measuring them. For the first time, I wasn't explaining myself. I wasn't justifying decisions. I wasn't trying to be understood. I already understood them. I realized something unsettling and empowering at the same time. They had built their confidence on the idea that I was weak. And the second that belief cracked, everything else started to wobble. I wasn't the loudest person in the room. I wasn't the angriest. I wasn't the most emotional. But I was the one with clarity. With leverage. With options. And they could feel it. That's when it hit me. I was no longer reacting to the game. I was shaping it. The fallout didn't come with shouting or dramatic confrontations, it came quietly, and that somehow made it heavier. People who once spoke over me started choosing their words carefully. Decisions that used to be made about me were suddenly run through me. The same relatives who had called me too soft or not cut out for this began asking for my opinion, then my approval. I watched the shift with a strange calm. One cousin stopped making jokes entirely. An aunt who used to lecture me about how the world works avoided eye contact at family gatherings. A deal they tried to push without me stalled, because I was the missing piece they'd underestimated for too long. What surprised me most wasn't their discomfort, but my lack of triumph. I didn't feel smug. I felt steady. Grounded. Like I was finally standing on solid ground while they scrambled on assumptions they'd built themselves. Some relationships cracked under the weight of this new reality. A few people tried to rewrite the past, claiming they'd always believed in me. I didn't correct them. I didn't need to. Their change in behavior was louder than any apology. For the first time, the consequences weren't mine to carry. They belonged exactly where they should have been, with the people who thought weakness was permanent and kindness meant incompetence. Looking back now, the strangest part isn't what they did to me, it's how long I believed their version of who I was. For years, I accepted being called weak, too soft, not smart enough to handle real decisions. I confused silence with powerlessness, patience with failure. I see now how wrong that was. What changed everything wasn't revenge or a dramatic confrontation. It was understanding my own value without needing their approval. I learned that people who benefit from underestimating you will fight hardest when you stop playing the role they assigned. The moment I stopped explaining myself, stopped proving, stopped begging to be seen, the balance shifted. I didn't win by becoming cruel. I won by becoming calm, prepared, and grounded. I set boundaries. I chose when to speak and when to walk away. And I realized that being underestimated is sometimes an advantage, if you're willing to wait and move wisely. If you're reading this and you've been labeled the weak one in your family or circle, hear this: you don't need to convince anyone of your strength. Build quietly. Learn patiently. Protect yourself. When the time comes, you won't need to announce your power, it will be obvious. Sometimes the strongest move is letting people believe you're powerless, right up until you're not.